friends. Welcome to Foggy Oak Fairy Tales, a stories podcast for all ages, where we tell farm stories from real-life happenings on Foggy Oak Farm, as well as fantasy tales to spark both learning and imagination. I'm so glad you're here. This week, we have part 2 of Jack and the Beanstalk. Last time, Jack planted a magical bean that grew overnight into a colossal beanstalk. He climbed up and discovered a giant's castle where he rescued a long-fingered lemur known as an Eye-Eye. The Eye-Eye rewarded Jack with a bag of infinite treasure and told him that there were 2 more castles further up the beanstalk. These castles also had creatures who were being forced to guard treasures, and they decided to try and save them too. So far, Jack and the Eye-Eye have made their way into the second castle, but they've just noticed that the leg of a huge table has started moving. Did they stumble into a trap? Let's join them and find out in this conclusion of our Jack and the Beanstalk adaptation. Gigantic dark brown head that they had taken for the foot of the table, and which looked exactly like the table's dark swirled wood, lifted up. Slitted gray eyes blinked at them, and a long forked tongue flicked out to taste the air. Jack had started to turn to run away when he heard the great serpent call out, "I say, aren't you that poor lemur that the youngest giant had forced to guard treasure down below?" "I am," the Eye-Eye responded cautiously. "Who might you be?" The serpent continued to unwind itself from the table leg as it responded. "I am a basilisk, and I've been trapped here by the middle brother, forced to guard his horn of plenty." The snake pointed with its head to the top of the table where, in the midst of the vast feast, sat an old and dented horn that looked to be about the size of a bugle. It was tiny compared to all the food, and it couldn't have been much bigger than a giant's fingernail. "I can see you're surprised," the basilisk commented. "The middle giant stole it from a fairy village after he stomped on all the houses. It puts out any kind of food you wish for in as much abundance as you wish. The middle giant doesn't even need to go out hunting. He just chooses to because he likes catching live prey, and the horn won't give him that." Jack was intrigued, but also beginning to remember something about basilisks. There was something important. The Eye-Eye beat him to it. "A basilisk, eh?" it asked. "So I suppose you were supposed to turn us to stone and eat us." That was what Jack had been trying to remember. If a basilisk looked at you and wanted to, you would be turned to stone. "More or less," the snake acknowledged, "but I can control when I turn someone to stone. It's not true that it's just if you look at me, obviously," it added, winking at them. "And the middle giant really just captured me to protect against his brothers. He never expected a human and a lemur would come up here. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm not obligated to do anything at all." With the snake fully uncoiled from the table leg, its body color shifted to match the varying shades of dark gray stone covering the floor. Jack could now see that it was at least 30 feet long. But he noted that just like the Eye-Eye, the snake had a chain wrapped around it. This time just below its head, with nasty-looking spikes pointing inward towards the snake's throat. "I guess that's so you can't get away, huh?" Jack asked, gesturing to the awful chain. The snake glanced angrily at his chain. "Yes, it's unbreakable, and if I try to fight and get away, the spikes dig into my neck painfully. You two really ought to leave. The middle giant has been out hunting, but I never know when he's going to come back." "My chain was unbreakable, too," the Eye said quietly. They got them from a witch in exchange for her life, the basilisk replied distractedly. 3 in all, I think, 1 for each brother. But if you're free... The basilisk trailed off and looked at them inquisitively. We're not leaving you either, Jack said fiercely, and with that statement he felt another whoosh of magic leaving his body and settling onto the massive serpent's chain. In seconds it had dissolved to nothing, just like the Eye's. And just as before, Jack's skin looked still less sparkly than before. Thank you, the basilisk said gravely. I promised myself that if I were ever freed, I would give that horn of plenty to whoever helped me. And in the blink of an eye, it had slithered up the leg of the table, grabbed the horn, snagging the handle around one of its long fangs, and brought it back down to Jack and the Eye. It mumbled through its teeth, Here you go, take the horn. That was asking for rather a lot of trust from Jack, who had to approach right up to the basilisk's eerie gray eyes and long, sharp fangs, which, given the basilisk's overall size, were quite as long as Jack's legs. Still, he wanted that horn. He carefully slid it off the basilisk's fang and tucked it into his treasure sack. It fit perfectly. He slung the bag back over his shoulder and looked at the basilisk. We can't leave you here either, Jack said. The Eye and I are going up to the last castle to see if the oldest giant has someone trapped too. You're welcome to head down the Beanstalk and wait at my house if you like. You'll stay with me, I hope. The basilisk gave what Jack assumed was a basilisk equivalent of a smile. I appreciate that, but no, I'm coming with you. I happen to know what the oldest giant has, and you may have need of me. What does he have? Jack asked. His castle lies across freezing waters normally only reachable by his boat, and by his great black dog who guards his treasure and his castle. We were captured at the same time. He may remember me. So saying, the basilisk began slithering away, and Jack and the Eye were left to run along behind, trying to keep up. The serpent was already halfway to the next cloud deck by the time Jack and the Eye reached the stalk. Below, they could still hear the youngest giant arguing with his wife about where the Eye had gone. Better hurry. I hear the middle giant coming, the snake advised. Sure enough, great booming footsteps were now audible by Jack and the Eye. They froze on the beanstalk as a terrifyingly huge giant stomped into his castle. He was filthy with wild, tangled hair and torn clothing, and it didn't look like he'd had any luck hunting that day, which meant he was hungry as well.
Horn! Horn!
They heard him yell.
Make me a human stew, a big un.
And then,
Where's my stew?
And then,
Where's my horn? Where's my snake?
And then,
From 5 feet, I smell a human near to me.
Go, 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 hissed the Eye, and the 3 of them rushed their way up the beanstalk. The basilisk had told the truth. When they arrived at the next cloud bank, they found that they stood on the shore of a dark and dangerous-looking lake. A massive rowboat floated nearby, far too large for them to be able to use. Jack reached a hand down to touch the water and recoiled with a yelp. It was cold as ice. The castle sat in the middle of the lake on an island. Jack and the Eye immediately knew that for them to try and swim that expanse would mean death. They'd never be able to stay warm enough to swim to the other side. This is why you needed me, the basilisk emphasized. Climb on my back and hang on tight. Jack and the Eye did as the great serpent commanded and hoisted themselves onto its back. The basilisk immediately slid into the lake, carefully keeping Jack and the Eye above the frigid water. For a giant basilisk, the intimidating swim was hardly worth mentioning. It ferried them across in a few minutes. When they slithered onto the island in the middle of the lake, they soon saw a huge, shaggy black dog chained to a boulder outside the castle's entrance. The dog had no shelter and looked as if it hadn't been brushed or fed in years. "Hello, old friend," the basilisk called. "Basilisk, is that you?" the dog cried in amazement. "It is. Please meet my companions, Jack and the Eye-Eye." "Hello, Jack, and hello, Eye-Eye. I am the Newfoundland, or Newfie, who has been forced to guard this castle and its treasure from the oldest giant's brothers." "You look just as miserable and badly treated as the basilisk and the Eye-Eye," Jack fumed. "I'm sick of these giants." The Newfie was about to respond when Jack's magic, evidently anticipating the pattern and sensing his rage at the mistreated dog's condition, flew out of him in the fastest rush yet, obliterating the rusted chain that held the dog to the rock as if it had never been. Jack felt his skin return to its normal, non-glittery appearance, and somehow he could tell that he had just used the last of his star magic. He felt nothing but joy at having freed the friendly Newfie. I'm free?" the dog asked, shaking its whole body in unbelieving delight. "You are," the basilisk responded. "Jack has freed us all today." "Well, hold on just a moment then," the dog responded with a grin. It gave a great leap and jumped straight from the shore into the bone-chilling waters of the lake, disappearing under the dark water. Is he going to be okay?" Jack worried. "He's a Newfoundland. They're made for swimming in freezing water. The giant must have put his treasure at the bottom of the lake and made him fetch it up when he wanted it," the basilisk responded, as if he didn't think Jack was very smart. "Based on our pattern so far, we'd better be prepared to get out of here quickly," the Eye-Eye reminded them. Jack and the basilisk nodded, and the Newfie suddenly breached the surface, dragging a net along in its jaws. It pulled the net to shore and spat it out. "That net will catch and hold anything you put in it until you decide to release it," he panted. "It's how they caught the basilisk and me. I swore that if anyone came to free me, I'd give them that net." The basilisk hissed in recognition. "I think I have an idea for how we can keep all three of these giants from ever hurting someone else again," Jack said with a devilish smile. The plan was simple. Jack and the Eye-Eye rowed back across the lake on the basilisk with the Newfie swimming alongside them. When they got back to the edge of the Beanstalk, Jack laid out the horn and the bag. The four friends then dashed behind a cloudy hill, fluffing up some of the cloud to cover themselves until they looked like part of the cloud itself. True to form, just as they were covered, they heard the stomp, tromp, stomp of the oldest giant returning to the shore. He must have had excellent eyesight because he immediately bellowed,
"Where's my dog?"
And then,
"From 5 feet, I smell a human on the breeze."
he tramped and stamped angrily around looking for them, when he came upon the Beanstalk. That put Jack and his friends downwind of the giant, and Jack had to hold his breath to keep from coughing. Clearly, like his middle brother, this giant didn't believe in bathing. He was bald like an egg with evil-looking red eyes. He had huge gray teeth that he gnashed as he stomped around. As the oldest giant was peering down the beanstalk, not having noticed the treasures near his feet yet, the middle giant suddenly emerged, nearly cracking his brother in the face with his head. The oldest giant stumbled back in surprise with an exclamation of displeasure.
"Oi!"
No sooner had the middle giant climbed onto the cloud bank than the youngest became visible, following close on the heels of his middle brother. Jack hadn't yet seen the youngest giant, and it had to be said there wasn't much of a family resemblance beyond being unbelievably dirty and stinky. The oldest was the tallest, he could now tell, while the youngest was shortest of all. Still enormous, of course, but on a smaller scale than his middle and older brothers. The youngest had short, stiff hair that looked like the bristles of a broom, sticking straight up to the sky. Unlike his brothers, he only had one bright green eye in the middle of his forehead, but it was perfectly capable of looking just as angry and ill-tempered as his brothers. It didn't appear that the youngest giant even had teeth, but with a mouth that big, Jack wasn't sure he'd need them, being able to instead simply swallow anything he wanted to eat whole.
Oi, brother! Some human has been at both our castles and our treasure is missing!
The youngest giant fumed.
Have you seen anyone? Neither of us has seen any sign.
The youngest giant trailed off. He had noticed his leather bag and his middle brother's horn laying on the ground beside his foot.
Oi!
The middle giant yelled, glaring at his oldest brother.
What are these doing here? Are you playing tricks on us to steal our most prized possessions?
He demanded. The youngest giant took a great breath through his nose.
Even smells like human up here, he rumbled. Bet you ate a human right before you came down to steal our treasure so we'd get confused.
The baffled oldest giant was about to protest that he had no idea what either of them were talking about or how those treasures had gotten there when he was socked in the gut by his brother's fist. These giants weren't the smartest of creatures, and any thought of explanation or protest immediately flew out of the oldest giant's head, along with the breath that whooshed out of him from his brother's sucker punch. The middle giant jumped onto his older brother's back just as the older brother was trying to regain his breath, and the younger giant readied himself to throw another punch. As the three tangled themselves together, Jack and his friends ran out from behind the cloud and worked together to heave the net high into the air and over the three fighting giants. As it fell, it expanded in size until it was more than large enough to cover them. When the three giants cried out and reached up to throw the net off of them, it pulled in tighter and tighter, wrapping around them until it tumbled them to the ground. As soon as their feet temporarily left the cloudy ground, it snapped closed around them. And there they lay, in a frantic, writhing heap, utterly trapped.
Which one of you did this?
The older giant roared.
Us!
The middle giant yelled.
We're trapped too!
Rather than think through the situation and realize that someone else must have caught them, the three giants began trying to fight their way out of the net. When the youngest giant stepped on both his brother's toes in his haste to try and free himself, they all set to fighting each other. Soon they were tumbling away over the clouds, kicking and punching and rolling together in a fierce knot, bound by the net and unable to separate, which only made them more angry. Before long, they were out of sight. Jack and his friends took the opportunity to gather the treasures back up and slip their way down the beanstalk and away from the fighting giants. The eye settled onto Jack's shoulders, the basilisk curled its tail gently around the Newfie since the dog had no way to easily climb down, and they all carefully climbed back down to the ground. When they got to the base of the beanstalk, Jack introduced the trio of new friends to his mother, who, while a little startled by the strange group, was nonetheless very welcoming. Jack and his mother invited the animals to stay with them. The animals, having long since lost their homes, were very happy to agree, and the five of them set about creating their very own happily ever after. With an endless supply of money and food, I think you can agree they were off to a pretty good start. And what of the three giant brothers? Some say they are fighting each other to this day. Although most of that time of magic and mischief has passed from reality into legend, if you hear thunder during a storm, it might very well be those giants, still wrestling with and roaring at each other while trying to escape the net, convinced it's someone else's fault. The end. Thanks to Jude, Crosby, Bela, and Courtney for requesting the fantastic creatures for this story. We'll be back next week with another tale. Remember, you're part of the story too. What did you think of this story? What did you imagine when you were listening? We'd love to hear your part of the story. If you and your grown-up want, you can share your thoughts or a picture you drew with our Foggy Oak podcast family. You might find it easiest to share with us on Facebook at Foggy Oak Farm, but we have lots of options on our website, foggyoakfairytales.com. You can also check out pictures from the farm and learn more about us. Thanks for being part of the story, and I hope you'll join us next week.